Okay, part 3. When they determined to put to death the infants of the holy ones, and when a single boy had been cast forth but saved, as a reproof you carried off their multitude of sons, and made them perish all at once in the mighty water. That night was known beforehand to our fathers, that with sure knowledge of the oaths in which they put their faith, they might have courage. Your people awaited the salvation of the just and the destruction of their foes. For when you punished our adversaries, in this you glorified us whom you had summoned. For in secret the holy children of the good were offering sacrifice, and putting into effect with one accord the divine institution, that your holy ones should share alike the same good things and dangers, having previously sung the praises of the fathers. But the discordant cry of their enemies responded, and the piteous wail of mourning for children was borne to them, and the slave was smitten with the same retribution as his master. Even the plebeians suffered the same as the king, and all alike by a single death had countless dead. For the living were not even sufficient for the burial, since at a single instant their nobler offspring were destroyed. For though they disbelieved at every turn on account of sorceries. Now that line alone, listen to this. For though they disbelieved at every turn on account of sorceries. At the destruction of the firstborn, they acknowledged that the people was God's son. For when peaceful stillness compassed everything, and the night in its swift course was half spent, your all-powerful word from heaven's royal throne bounded a fierce warrior into the doomed land, bearing the sharp sword of your inexorable decree. And as he aligned, he filled every place with death. He still reached to heaven while he stood upon the earth. Then forthwith visions and horrible dreams perturbed them, and unexpected fears assailed them, and cast half dead, one here, another there. Each was revealing the reason for his dying. For the dreams that disturbed them had proclaimed this beforehand, lest they perish unaware of why they suffered ill. But the trial of death touched at one time even the just, and in the desert a plague struck the multitude, yet not for long did the anger last. So this is all touching on the death of the firstborn of the Egyptians, where the Israelites were spared. I'm going to continue on with this. All right. And I'm just going to continue on. For the blameless man hastened to be their champion, bearing the weapon of his special office, prayer, and the propitiation of incense. He withstood the wrath and put a stop to the calamity, showing that he was your servant. Now this next verse, this is what I was brought to share in a video, in the part 1, part 2, reroute and reroute in Christ videos yesterday. I was brought to share this verse yesterday because it's a very good verse. And he overcame the bitterness, not by bodily strength, not by force of arms, but by word he overcame the smiter, recalling the sworn covenants with their fathers. Wow. By word. For when corpses had already fallen one on another in heaps, he stood in the midst and checked the anger, and cut off the way to the living. For on his full-length robe was the whole world, and the glories of the fathers were carved in 4 rows upon the stones, and your grandeur was on the crown upon his head. To these names the destroyer yielded, and these he feared, for the mere trial of anger was enough. My glasses on because I can hardly even see this. Excuse me. All right, this next chapter, I've been brought to this chapter quite a bit in the last year, and this next chapter is pretty intense. So chapter 19 is the last chapter. whatever I can't finish in this video, I'll probably have one more video. But the wicked, merciless wrath assailed until the end, for he knew beforehand what they were yet to do, that though they themselves had agreed to the departure and had anxiously sent them on their way, they would regret it and pursue them. For while they were still engaged in funeral rites and were mourning at the burials of the dead, they adopted another senseless plan, and those whom they had sent away with entreaty they pursued as fugitives. Those whom they had sent away with entreaty they pursued as fugitives. Wow. For a compulsion suited to this ending drew them on, and made them forgetful of what had befallen them, that they might fill out the torments of their punishment, and your people might experience a glorious journey, while those others met an extraordinary death. For all creation in its several kinds was being made over anew, serving its natural laws, that your children might be preserved unharmed. The cloud overshadowed their camp, and out of what had before been water, dry land was seen emerging. Out of the Red Sea, an unimpeded road, and a grassy plain out of the mighty flood. Over this cross the whole nation sheltered by your hand, after they beheld stupendous wonders. For they ranged about like horses, and bounded about like lambs, praising you, O Lord, their deliverer. For they were still mindful of what had happened in their sojourn, how instead of the young animals the land brought forth gnats, and instead of fishes the river swarmed with countless frogs. And later they saw also a new kind of bird. When prompted by desire they asked for pleasant foods. For to appease them quail came to them from the sea, and the punishments came upon sinners only after forewarning from the violence of the thunderbolts. For they justly suffered for their own misdeeds, since indeed they treated their guests with more grievous hatred. For those others did not receive unfamiliar visitors, but these were enslaving beneficent guests. Wow. I'm going to go over this again because this stands out to me a lot. For they justly suffered for their own misdeeds, since indeed they treated their guests with the more grievous hatred. For those others did not receive unfamiliar visitors, but these were enslaving beneficent guests. So bringing in people that they already knew and enslaving them, instead of receiving outsiders, receiving unfamiliar guests. Do we not do that sometimes? Wow. And not that only, but what punishment was to be theirs, since they received strangers unwillingly. I believe Jesus spoke on this quite a bit. Yet these, after welcoming them with festivities, oppressed with awful toils those who now shared with them the same rights. And they were struck with blindness, and those others had been at the portals of the just, when surrounded by yawning darkness, each sought the entrance of his own gate. That is so intense. I don't know if you can see right here, but I've had this marked because it's just so, it just stands out to me so deeply, and has for over a year now. I've reflected back on that one line. But, wow. For the elements in variable harmony among themselves, like strings of the harp, produce new melody, while the flow of music steadily persists, and this can be perceived exactly from a review of what took place. For land creatures were changed into water creatures, and those that swam went over onto the land. Fire and water maintained its own strength, and water forgot its quenching nature. Flames, by contrast, neither consumed the flesh of the perishable animals that went about in them, nor melted the ice like quick melting kind of ambrosial food. For every way, O Lord, you magnified and glorified your people. Unfailing, you stood by them in every time and circumstance.